The gun went off before anyone said a word. That was how she would remember it later. Not the screaming, not the smoke, not the way her heels caught on the marble floor when she ran. Just the sound. One clean crack, like something that had been waiting to break finally did. Tessa had been standing in the lobby of Hargrove and Associates for exactly 4 minutes when the doors burst open. She had not been supposed to be there at all. 3 weeks earlier, she was eating a gas station sandwich in her car because the office microwave had been broken for 6 months and no one had filed the maintenance request because no one had thought to ask Tessa to do it, and Tessa only did the things she was asked to do. That was the deal. That was always the deal. She kept her head down. She kept the books. She did not ask questions about the numbers that did not quite add up in the columns on the left side of the Mercer Group's quarterly ledger. She had noticed the discrepancy 14 months ago. She had not said anything. This was not cowardice, she told herself. This was survival. She had grown up in a house where noticing things got you hit, and then she had spent her 20s in offices where noticing things got you fired, and she had learned. The way you learn a language you did not choose. That the correct response to noticing something was to close the file, go back to your desk, and eat your gas station sandwich in your car. So that is what she did. Until the morning her boss, a man named Aldrin who wore the same 3 ties in rotation and always smelled faintly of spearmint gum, called her into his office and told her that there had been an audit discrepancy and that the discrepancy pointed to her. She sat very still. The signature on the amended Q2 filing, Aldrin said, not quite meeting her eyes. It matches yours. Tessa knew her own signature. She also knew she had never signed an amended Q2 filing. She said both of these things, calmly, in the careful, measured voice she had developed over years of being the kind of woman that no one listened to, unless she made herself very easy to listen to. Aldrin nodded. He looked almost sorry. "We're going to have to let you go," he said. Pending the investigation, she cleaned out her desk in 11 minutes. She knew because she counted. She had $2,400 in her checking account. She had a lease that renewed in 6 weeks. She had no family to call, one friend who lived in Portland and was going through her own disaster, and a very detailed understanding of exactly how someone had falsified a signature in an accounting ledger and left her holding the evidence. She spent 2 days sitting with it. On the 3rd day, she went back, not to Aldrin, not to HR. She went to the 42nd floor. The Mercer Group occupied floors 38 through 45 of a building downtown that was mostly glass and had the kind of lobby that made you feel like you had walked into a place that was not built for people like you. Tessa had worked on floor 40 for 3 years. She had never been to 42. 42 was where decisions were made, where the names at the top of the org chart actually existed in physical space. She did not have a meeting. She did not have an appointment. She had a manila folder with printed copies of 14 months of discrepancies, a timeline she had reconstructed from memory, and her own personal backups. Because she had always kept personal backups quietly, the way you keep a spare key somewhere no one knows about, and the name of the account the money had been moved into. The receptionist on 42 looked at her the way receptionists look at people who do not have appointments. "I need to see whoever is responsible for the Mercer Group accounts," Tessa said. "Do you have an appointment?" "No. Then I can't." "Tell them," Tessa said, "that I have documentation of $3.2 million in internal transfers between January of last year and last month. Tell them the money went somewhere. Tell them I know where." The receptionist picked up the phone. Tessa sat down in one of the chairs that was designed to be too low and too soft so that visitors felt small. She had noticed that about lobby furniture a long time ago. She sat in it anyway, and she waited. She was good at waiting. They did not send someone from accounting. They sent a man she had never seen before, which meant he was not from accounting, and probably not from any floor she had ever worked on. He was tall in the way that takes up space without trying. Dark suit, no tie, a face that had stopped being young some years ago and had not bothered to be soft in the interim. There was a scar along his jaw, thin and old, the kind that had been there long enough that the person wearing it had forgotten to hide it. He looked at her like she was a problem he was trying to classify. "You're the one from accounting," he said. "I'm the one they fired from accounting," Tessa said. "There's a difference." Something shifted in his expression. Not softness, something more like recalibration. "Come with me," he said. She followed him down a hallway she had never seen and into a conference room that had no windows and one long table and 4 chairs. He did not offer her water. He did not introduce himself. He sat down across from her and held out his hand for the folder. She did not give it to him. "I want to know who I'm talking to," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Vance," he said, just the one word. Just the last name, like first names, were a currency he didn't spend with people he hadn't assessed yet. "And what do you do here, Vance?" "I make sure problems get solved. Are you the one who made my problem?" The room was very quiet. He had a stillness to him that was not relaxation. It was the kind of stillness that comes from being someone who does not need to move to be dangerous. "No," he said. She believed him. She was not sure why she believed him, except that she had spent her career learning to read numbers. And numbers did not lie the way people did. They just got a range dishonestly. And something about the way he said no had the quality of a number that was exactly where it was supposed to be. She put the folder on the table. He opened it. He read through it slowly, which surprised her. Most men in his position would have glanced, handed it to someone else, performed the kind of attention that was really just theater. Vance read every page. He went back twice to the transfer records. He set the folder down and looked at her. "How long have you had this?" he said. "The documentation? 3 days. The knowledge? 14 months. Why didn't you say something 14 months ago?" Tessa folded her hands on the table. "Because I couldn't prove it, and because I wasn't the one being accused of it yet." He was quiet for a moment. "They used your signature," he said. "Yes. Why yours?" "Because I'm the one person in that department who had access to all 4 accounts and no connections to anyone on the executive floor. Nobody would vouch for me. Nobody would even remember my name clearly enough to argue that I hadn't done it." She said this without bitterness. It was just a fact. I was useful because I was invisible. Vance looked at her for a long moment. Not the way men usually looked at her. Through her, past her, at the space slightly to the left of her face. He looked at her like she was a column of figures he was trying to balance. "What do you want?" he said. My name cleared. "Whatever documentation you have on your end that can show the transfers were initiated above my level, and my job back, or severance. I'll take either." "That's it? That's enough." He closed the folder. He set both hands flat on the table. He was quiet for a count of 5. She counted, and then he said, "I can clear your name. I can give you the documentation. But your job back or your severance both require going through the Mercer Group's legal department. And the Mercer Group's legal department is currently managed by the same person who authorized those transfers." She stared at him. "So the person who framed me," she said slowly, "also controls the mechanism by which I would be unframed." "Yes, that's a very clean trap." "It's a common one," he said, and something in his voice made her think he had seen it before, maybe from both sides. She looked at her folder on the table. She had been so sure, coming in here, that the documentation would be enough, that the truth would function like a key. You put it in the lock, the door opened. She had forgotten again, the way she always forgot until she was reminded, that the lock and the key both had to belong to the same system. "So what are my options?" she said. Vance picked up the folder and stood. "Give me 72 hours, he said. "To do what? To solve the problem a different way." She looked up at him. In the flat light of the windowless room he was very still and very certain, and she had learned enough about powerful men to know that certainty and competence were 2 very different things. But there was something in his face that was not performance. The tiredness, maybe. The way he was not trying to impress her. "Why would you do that?" she said. "Because the person who took that money," Vance said, "took it from me. She came back in 72 hours. She did not sleep much in the interim. She ran the numbers in her head the way she always did when she was anxious. Not because math was comforting exactly, but because numbers had rules. And rules meant that outcomes were theoretically predictable. and predictability was the closest thing she had ever found to safety. The lobby on 42 was quieter this time. The same receptionist did not look at her like a stranger. She was brought back to the same conference room, and Vance was there again, same suit, possibly the same stillness, a different folder on the table. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He pushed the folder across the table. Inside was a printed email chain, 3 bank statements, and a signed affidavit from someone whose name she did not recognize, but whose title was Chief Financial Officer. The transfers were initiated by Mercer's VP of Operations, Vance said. He used your credentials because you were the only junior accountant with full-tier access, which was a systems oversight that has since been corrected. The CFO has agreed to testify to this. The documentation has been submitted to the relevant regulatory body. Your name will be formally cleared within 10 business days. Tessa looked at the papers. She looked at them for a long time. "And the VP," she said. "No longer employed. That's not the same as accountable." "No," Vance said. "It's not." She looked up at him. "Did you do that on purpose?" He met her eyes and said nothing which she was beginning to understand was a form of answer. "What about my job?" she said. "The Mercer Group is prepared to offer you a settlement." He named a number. She kept her face neutral. The number was more than she had expected. More than 2 years of salary. Enough to breathe. "There's a condition," he said. Of course there was. "The settlement requires a non-disclosure agreement covering all financial documentation related to the Q2 transfers and all related internal communications." She set the paper down. "So I get paid to stay quiet, you get compensated for damages, and you agree not to discuss the specifics of an internal investigation. Is there a difference?" "Legally," he said, "yes. Practically," he paused. "I understand why you'd see it differently." She sat back in her chair. She thought about the gas station sandwich. She thought about the way Aldrin had not quite met her eyes. She thought about 14 months of saying nothing, and how that had protected her exactly as much as she had calculated it would, which was not at all. "I need to think about it," she said. "I know." She stood to leave. At the door she stopped. She was not sure why. Some pull she couldn't account for, like a figure on a balance sheet that kept coming out wrong. "That money he took," she said, not turning around. "He took it from you specifically or from the company?" A pause. "From a fund I use for very specific purposes," Vance said. "The kind I don't put my name on publicly." She turned. "What kind of purposes?" He looked at her for a long time. The scar on his jaw caught the light differently when he tilted his head. He was calculating something. She could see it in the quality of his stillness, not impassivity, but active thought, the kind that didn't make noise. "The kind," he said, "that don't go through legal departments." She should have left. She knew she should have left. She was not a person who walked toward things that were clearly marked as dangerous. She was a person who kept backups and ate her lunch alone and noticed things quietly, from a safe distance. "The person who stole from you," she said. "What happens to him?" "He'll be found," Vance said. "Eventually. And when he's found—" Another long pause. "He'll wish he hadn't been." She looked at him standing in that room, in that suit, with that face that had been through things she hadn't asked about and wouldn't, and she made a calculation. Not the logical kind, the other kind, the one she usually ignored. "I can tell you exactly where the money went," she said. "All of it. Every transfer, every account, every routing number. I have it memorized." Vance went very still. "In exchange," she said, "I want the NDA modified to exempt me from any liability if I ever need to discuss what I know with law enforcement. And I want the settlement." He was quiet. "You memorized the routing numbers," he said, like he was testing the sentence. "I'm good with numbers," she said. Something moved in his expression that she could not quite name. It was not admiration. It was something more unsettled than that, like he had picked up a folder expecting it to weigh a certain amount, and it had turned out to be heavier. "Sit back down," he said. She sat. She did not plan to be at Hargrove and Associates 3 weeks later. She was there because Vance had called her, the first time he had called her directly, the number showing up on her screen as a string of digits she didn't recognize, and said, in that flat, unhurried voice, that he needed someone who could identify the original account signatures on site and that the meeting was happening in 1 hour, and that she did not have to come if she didn't want to. She went. She was not sure what she had expected. Some kind of negotiation, maybe. A meeting room. Men in suits. The kind of tension that sounded like nothing from the outside. She was not expecting the gun. She was not expecting any of it. Not the shouting that started before she cleared the lobby door. Not the way the 3 men near the elevator turned in one motion like something had been triggered. Not the sound of her own name in Vance's voice from somewhere to her left, sharp and entirely unlike the measured tone he used in conference rooms. Tessa. Down. She dropped. It was not a decision. It was her body doing the thing her body apparently knew to do, which surprised her, because she had never been in a situation that required it before. When she raised her head, 30 seconds later or 3 hours later, she genuinely could not have said. Vance was standing between her and the 3 men, and the 3 men were on the floor, and none of this made any sense, and her heart was doing something in her chest that she did not have a number for. He crouched down next to her. "Are you hurt?" he said. His voice was exactly the same as it was in the conference room, calm, a little tired, like he had just finished reviewing a quarterly report. "No," she said. "Can you stand?" She stood. Her legs were less certain about this than her voice was, but they held. He looked at her for a moment. Not the assessing look from the first meeting. Something more direct, more concerned, in the way that concern looks on a face that doesn't usually show it. Small and careful, and a little like it cost something. "You should have stayed in the lobby," he said. "You said 1 hour," she said. "I was on time." Something crossed his face that might, in different light, from a different person, have been the beginning of a smile. "Come on," he said. "We're not done." He drove her home himself. Not in the armored car. She had seen the armored car, black and anonymous, parked outside, in a different car. Something older. She noticed there was a parking receipt on the dash from a garage, 3 blocks from her apartment, which meant he had known exactly where she lived before he called her. And she found she was not alarmed by this, in the way she probably should have been. She sat in the passenger seat and looked at the city going by, and felt the adrenaline leaving her in slow degrees, like water draining from a bathtub that was in no particular hurry. "Who were they?" she said. "Associates of the man we're looking for? Were they supposed to?" Yes, she absorbed this. "Because of me?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because of what you know." She looked at her hands in her lap, her accounting firm hands she always thought, small, ink-stained sometimes, steady in a way that the rest of her was not always steady. "So I'm a liability," she said. "You're a witness," he said, "to a man who would rather I wasn't." "Yes." She turned to look at him. The streetlights were doing something to the side of his face. That old scar, the careful way he held his jaw. He drove the way he did everything else without wasted motion. "What happens now?" she said. He was quiet for a few seconds. She had learned, in the 3 weeks of this, whatever this was, to count his silences. Short ones meant he was deciding what to tell her. Long ones meant he was deciding something bigger. This was a long one. "There's a house," he said, "owned through 3 different entities. Nobody looks for people there. It's safe. Whose house?" "Mine," he said, "in the sense that nothing leads back to my name, but yes, you're asking me to stay in your safe house. I'm telling you that it's available," he said, "if you want it." She looked back at the city. Her apartment building was 3 blocks ahead. She had lived there for 4 years. She knew which step on the second-floor staircase creaked, and where the super left the mail when it didn't fit in her box, and how the radiator made a sound at 3 a.m. like someone knocking. She knew almost nothing about Vance. She knew his last name and the fact that his money moved in ways that didn't go through legal departments, and that he had a scar he'd forgotten to hide, and that when he said her name in a room with guns in it, she had hit the floor without deciding to. She also knew that she was not safe in her apartment. That was just math. "How long?" she said. "Until it's over. And when is it over?" "When the man who stole from both of us is found," Vance said, "and held to account. Both of us," he had said. She noticed that. "All right," she said, "but I want my laptop and my external drives, and I want to be useful." I'm not sitting in a safe house doing nothing while someone else looks through records I already have memorized. The corner of his mouth did something, not quite a smile, maybe the structural component of one. I wasn't planning to keep you out of it, he said. She looked at him. You're good with numbers, he said, and I have a lot of numbers that need someone good. She should say no. She knew she should say no. She had a very specific policy about powerful men and entanglements, and the kind of situations that started with one favor and ended with you having no clear idea where your life had gone. She said, okay. The house was not what she expected. It was not a compound. It was not a tower. It was a house in a part of the city that nobody wealthy announced they were interested in, on a street with a bakery and a dry cleaner and a woman who walked a very old basset hound past the front window every morning at 7:15. Tessa knew this because she watched from the upstairs window, and the woman's schedule was more reliable than most things she had encountered recently. She set up her laptop on the dining room table the first night. She did not ask for permission. Vance was on the phone in the other room. She could hear him, not the words, just the low, measured cadence of it, and she pulled up her files and started mapping the transfer chain from the beginning. She was still there at 2 a.m. when he came in. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at the table, at the files, at the coffee she had made from the machine in the kitchen that looked extremely expensive and which she had figured out in 11 minutes. You should sleep, he said. I'm close to something, she said. He was quiet. Then he walked over and pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. She had not expected that. She had expected him to say goodnight and go away. Men like Vance. She did not have many data points, but enough. Did not usually sit down at 2 a.m. and look at someone else's spreadsheets. He looked at her screen for a moment. Walk me through it, he said. So she did. It took 40 minutes. He asked good questions, not the questions of someone who was performing interest, but the specific, slightly impatient questions of someone who understood the structure and wanted to get to the anomaly. She liked that. She did not say so. When she finished, he sat back. The kitchen light was making the tiredness on his face more visible than the office light had. He looked like someone who had been doing something hard for a very long time and had gotten good at not mentioning it. The account this routes to, he said. It's been emptied 3 days after the last transfer. But the path it took getting there, she pointed at the screen, it goes through 2 shell companies. And one of them has a registered agent I recognize. He looked at her. From the Mercer Group, he said. From a filing I did 2 years ago, she said, for a subsidiary that was dissolved. Except she pulled up another window. It wasn't dissolved. The dissolution papers were filed. The company wasn't dissolved. Someone just filed the papers. He was very still. You found this tonight, he said. I've been here 9 hours. You found this in 9 hours. She looked at him. I told you I was good with numbers. He looked at her for a long moment in the 2 a.m. kitchen quiet. The old scar, the careful eyes, the quality of his attention that was, she had come to understand, not something he gave to everyone. You did, he said. She closed her laptop. Go to sleep, she said. I'll have more in the morning. He did not move immediately. He sat there for another moment, and she had the feeling, not for the first time, that he was recalibrating something, running a number again that kept coming out differently than he'd expected. Tessa, he said. She looked up. He seemed to consider the next sentence carefully. That was another thing she had learned about him. He did not start sentences he didn't know how to finish. Thank you, he said, for the routing numbers, for coming back, for, he paused very briefly, all of this. She held his gaze. Her heart was doing a thing she had no category for. You cleared my name, she said, and you put yourself between me and 3 men in a lobby. That's different, he said. Is it? She said. He did not answer. He stood up. He was nearly at the door when she said quietly into the dark kitchen, Vance. He stopped. The year I spent not saying anything, she said. I won't do that again. Whatever is happening, whatever this is, I need you to tell me the truth. Even the parts that are complicated. He turned around. He looked at her across the dark kitchen with the expensive coffee machine and the dining room table covered in her files, and she could not read everything in his face, but she could read enough. I know, he said. She did not know, yet, what that meant. Whether it was a promise or an acknowledgement, or just 2 words he had reached for because they were the closest ones available. She did not know what came next, or how the account chain ended, or what was on the other side of this, whatever this was. But she had the routing numbers, and she had the files, and she was starting to understand that Vance, whatever else he was a man who paid his debts. In her experience, that was rarer than it should have been. She turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs. Somewhere outside, a car moved through the quiet street. The city went on being the city. She did not feel small in the way she usually did at 2 a.m., alone. That was something she didn't have a number for either. She decided for once not to try.